The Empress and the unyielding suitors. The grand hall of the Empress was filled with whispers. Suitors from across the galaxy had come to win her heart. Some were kings of mighty empires, others were powerful warriors, and a few were diplomats, from planets known for their wealth. But all had failed. No matter what they offered, no matter how they tried to impress her, the Empress remained unmoved. She sat on her throne, her eyes cold, her expression unchanged as each suitor presented his gifts, his riches, his promises. Today was no different. The court was filled with nervous energy. The next suitor stepped forward, his armor shining, in the light his face full of confidence. He had come from a distant star system, bringing with him treasures beyond imagination. He bowed before the Empress, his voice deep and respectful. "Your Majesty, I offer you the finest jewels and the rarest spices from my world. My people are known for their wealth and power. I offer you not only these, but my loyalty and my heart." The way Empress looked at him, her eyes as cold as the stars. She said nothing. She simply glanced at the jewels he had brought, the spices that filled the air with their sweet aroma, but none of it impressed her. She had seen it all before. The wealth, the gifts, they meant nothing to her. They were empty gestures, meant to win her favor, but they failed to reach her heart. The suitor stood there for a moment, waiting for a response. When none came, he lowered his head and walked away, his face red with shame. The next suitor stepped forward, this time a warrior with a sword crafted from the strongest metal in the galaxy. "Your Majesty," he said with pride, "I offer you not just wealth but strength. I am a warrior and I will protect you and your kingdom with my life." Again, the Empress did not speak. She simply looked at him, her eyes betraying no emotion. She had heard this before too. The promises of strength, the boasts of bravery, none of it touched her. She had seen warriors fall, and she had seen kings crumble. Power was fleeting. Strength was temporary. She wanted something more. The suitor stood in silence, waiting for a response, but none came. Slowly, he turned and walked away, defeated. This continued for hours. Suitor after suitor came forward, each one trying to win her favor with gifts, power, or promises. And each time the Empress remained unmoved, her gaze distant and cold. The crowd that had gathered in the hall began to grow restless. They had come to see the Empress choose her next companion, but all they saw were failed attempts. Some whispered among themselves, wondering why the Empress was so hard to please. Others speculated that no one would ever win her heart. Not because they weren't worthy, but because she had grown too powerful, too cold to be reached by anyone. But then, just as the last suitor stepped forward, a murmur rippled through the crowd. A figure had appeared in the doorway. The human. No one had expected him. He was not a king or a warrior. He was not rich, nor was he powerful. He was just a man, dressed simply, with no grand gesture to offer. Yet there was something about him that made everyone stop and look. The human walked into the hall, his steps slow and measured. He did not bow or present gifts. He did not speak of power or strength. He simply looked at the Empress, his eyes calm and steady. The Empress, who had seen thousands of suitors before him, felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Curiosity. The room grew silent. All eyes were on the human. The Empress stared at him, her face unreadable. The human stood before her, waiting for her to speak. After a long moment, the Empress finally looked at him, her voice cold but curious. "Why do you think you deserve my attention?" she asked, her words sharp as if testing him. The human met her gaze without flinching. He didn't offer her riches or strength. He didn't promise to fight for her or protect her. Instead, he simply spoke. "Because I don't believe I need to impress you," he said, his voice steady. "I believe in honesty. I believe in being real. And if that's not enough for you, then I'll leave." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, the Empress was silent. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. The human's words, so simple, so honest, caught her off guard. She had always been surrounded by those who tried to win her with power, wealth, and influence. But this human, This stranger was different. He wasn't trying to win her over at all. The crowd waited breathless for the Empress's response. Would she dismiss him like all the others? Or would this human, with his quiet confidence, be the one to break through her walls? As the seconds passed, the Empress felt something stir within her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She looked at the human, her gaze softening for the first time that day. "Tell me your name," she said quietly. The human smiled, his eyes meeting, hers without fear. "My name is Kai," he replied. The room remained silent, and for the first time the Empress felt as though she was no longer in control of the situation. There was something about Kai that made her want to know more, something that made her question everything she had believed about power, strength, and what it truly meant to win a heart. But this was only the beginning, the silence that speaks volumes. The Empress sat back on her throne, her eyes never leaving the human named Kai. The silence in the grand hall was almost suffocating. The other suitors had long since been dismissed, but the atmosphere remained thick with tension. None of them had dared to speak after Kai's arrival. They were confused, intrigued, and perhaps even a little jealous. Here stood a man, not dressed in opulence or shining armor, but in plain, simple clothes. And yet, he had somehow captured the attention of their Empress, something none of them had managed to do. The Empress felt an odd sense of unease. This human's presence had unsettled her. For years, suitors had come and gone, their faces fading from her memory as quickly as they had appeared. Each had tried to gain her favor, each had failed in their own way. But Kai had done something different. He had walked in, said so little, and yet somehow his mere presence had stirred something in her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. After a long pause, the Empress finally spoke. Her voice was calm, but her words held a sharp edge. "Why did you come here?" she asked. "What do you seek from me, Kai?" Kai didn't hesitate. He didn't try to flatter her, didn't try to impress her with empty words. Instead, he spoke with a quiet confidence that seemed to fill the room. "I didn't come here seeking anything," he said simply. "I came because I was invited." The Empress raised an eyebrow. "Invited? I don't remember inviting you." "Not you specifically," Kai replied, his voice steady. "But I heard of your trials, of the many who had come before me, all seeking your favor. And I thought maybe I could learn something from the journey they took. Perhaps, in the end, I would understand what it means to truly impress you." The Empress's eyes narrowed. This was no ordinary man. He spoke as if he had already figured out something about her that no one else had even come close to understanding. She had expected arrogance, grand promises, perhaps even flattery. But he had offered none of that. Instead, he had come with humility and honesty, two things she hadn't seen in years. "And what did you learn?" she asked, her voice softening, ever so slightly. "I learned that none of them understood you," Kai replied without hesitation. "They all came here thinking they could win you over with gold, with power, with promises of loyalty. But none of them asked themselves what you truly wanted. None of them bothered to understand the woman sitting on that throne, the one who holds the fate of thousands in her hands. I came to learn who you are, Empress." The Empress felt a flicker of something she had buried deep within her for years. Curiosity. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever dared to ask such questions. And yet here was Kai, a simple human, doing just that. It unsettled her, but it also intrigued her in a way she couldn't explain. "You think you understand me?" she asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. Kai met her gaze without flinching. "I don't pretend to understand everything about you," he said. "But I know that you are more than just a ruler, more than just an empress. You are a person who has been trapped in a cage of her own making. You've surrounded yourself with power, with riches, with sycophants who bow to you, but you've never been truly seen. Not by them and not by anyone. But I see you." The words hung in the air, heavy and charged. The Empress felt a knot form in her stomach. It was true, what Kai said. For years she had been surrounded by people who only saw the title of Empress, not the woman behind it. They feared her power, admired her wealth, but no one had ever truly looked at her. No one had ever seen her. Kai's words pierced through the layers of armor she had built around herself. She felt vulnerable, exposed in a way that frightened her, but instead of retreating, instead of pushing him away like she had done with countless others, she felt something within her stir, a longing for connection, for understanding. "You think you can see me?" the Empress said, her voice softening. "But can you truly? Can you see the weight I carry every day? The burdens of ruling this empire? The constant pressure to maintain control, to never show weakness? Can you see how alone I am? How I have no one to trust?" Kai didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to her, his gaze never leaving hers. The tension between them was palpable. The entire room was silent, waiting for the next words to be spoken. "I don't pretend to know what it's like to be Empress," Kai said finally, "but I know what it's like to be alone, to feel as though no one understands you. And I know what it's like to want someone to see you for who you really are, not for the role you play." The Empress felt a wave of emotion crash over her. No one had ever said such things to her, not in such a raw, honest way. Kai's words touched something deep inside her, something she had hidden away for so long. "You are different," the Empress whispered, almost to herself. Kai smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "I'm not here to change your world, Empress. I'm here to show you that it doesn't have to be so cold, so lonely. I'm here to show you that there's more to life than power." The Empress stared at him, her heart racing. She had never felt so confused, so unsettled. Everything she thought she knew about herself, about her empire, was being questioned by this human who had done nothing but speak the truth. For the first time in years, the Empress felt something stir within her that was not fear, not power, but hope. Hope for something more than this endless cycle of control and isolation. But she wasn't sure if she was ready to embrace it. Not yet. The room held its breath as the silence stretched between them. Would she let go of the walls she had built around herself? Would she let Kai in? She wasn't sure yet. But one thing was clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. And with that, the first crack in her armor appeared. A moment of vulnerability. The Empress sat in her private chambers, her hands resting on the cold stone of the armrest. The weight of the crown on her head had never felt heavier. She stared out the window, her eyes tracing the distant horizon. The stars twinkled in the sky, a reminder of the vastness of the galaxy. And yet, here she was, alone. A ruler of an empire, but isolated, detached from everything and everyone. Everything she had known had been about control, power, and maintaining the unbreakable walls around her heart. Yet the human Kai had done something no one had ever managed to do. He had seen her, truly seen her, and it had unsettled her in ways she couldn't explain. She had always prided herself on her ability to keep others at a distance, to remain impervious to their attempts to reach her. But Kai had cracked that facade in a way that left her feeling exposed, vulnerable and unsure. For days, she had avoided him, too proud to admit that his words had reached her. But the truth was, she couldn't stop thinking about him. She couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at her, the way he had seen through the layers of armor she had carefully constructed over the years. The sound of soft footsteps broke her thoughts. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "You've been avoiding me." Kai's voice was calm, like the gentle breeze that swept through the chamber. His words held no judgment, no anger, only quiet understanding. The Empress remained, still her gaze fixed on the stars. "I don't need you here," she said, her voice distant. "You're just like the others. You think you can break through my walls, but you can't." Kai didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his presence somehow filling the room with an energy that was both calming and disarming. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but maybe you're the one who built those walls. Maybe you've spent so long behind them that you've forgotten what it feels like to live without them." The Empress clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. No one had dared to challenge her, to question her, and yet here was Kai, doing exactly that. It irritated her, but it also intrigued her. Why did his words feel different? Why did they stir something deep inside her? "You don't know anything about me," she said, her voice trembling slightly, betraying her calm exterior. "You don't know the burden I carry, the responsibility of ruling an empire, the constant pressure to maintain control, the fear that if I show even the slightest weakness, everything will fall apart." Kai didn't flinch. "I may not know everything about you," he said softly, "but I know what it feels like to carry a burden, to feel like no one sees you, no one understands. I know what it's like to live with the weight of expectations, to have to pretend to be something you're not, just to survive." The Empress turned to face him, her eyes flashing with a mix of anger and confusion. "And what would you know of survival?" she snapped. "You're just a human. You don't have the weight of a galaxy on your shoulders." Kai's gaze never wavered. "Maybe I don't. But I know what it's like to be invisible, to be ignored, overlooked. And I know how it feels when someone finally looks at you, not because they want something from you, but because they truly see you for who you are." The Empress's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't realized how badly she had wanted someone to see her, to acknowledge her as a person and not just a symbol of power. For so long she had hidden behind her title, behind the crown and the empire. She had pushed everyone away, believing that no one could ever understand the weight she carried. But Kai, he understood. He saw through the mask she had worn for so long. "You think I'm weak?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You think I can just let go of everything? Give up the empire? Give up the power?" Kai shook his head slowly. "No, I think you're stronger than that. I think you have the strength to be yourself, to let go of the things that have kept you trapped for so long. I think you have the strength to be free." His words pierced her like a blade, cutting through the layers of ice she had built around her heart. The Empress felt a rush of emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Fear, sadness, anger, longing. She had never let anyone get this close, and she didn't know how to handle it. She didn't know how to open up, how to let herself be vulnerable. For a long time there was silence between them. The Empress stood frozen, her mind racing. She wanted to push Kai away, to tell him to leave and never come back. But part of her didn't want him to go. Part of her wanted to hear more, to understand why his words made her feel this way. Finally she spoke, her voice shaky. "What do you want from me, Kai?" Her eyes were filled with uncertainty, but also something else. Something raw and real. "Why are you doing this? Why are you trying to get through to me?" Kai stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not trying to get through to you," he said softly. "I'm just trying to help you see that you don't have to be alone anymore. That you don't have to carry the weight of everything by yourself. I'm not asking you to change, Empress. I'm just asking you to let someone in." The Empress felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. She had never allowed herself to cry in front of anyone, not in front of her council, not in front of her people, and certainly not in front of a stranger. But something about Kai's words, his sincerity, broke through the walls she had spent years building. She had been so determined to remain strong, to keep control over every aspect of her life. But in that moment she realized that strength didn't mean never showing vulnerability. Sometimes the strongest thing you could do was allow yourself to be seen. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to let go." "You don't have to know how," Kai replied gently. "You just have to be willing to try." The Empress looked at him, her heart racing. For the first time in a long time she felt as though there was hope. Hope for something more than the empire, more than the crown. Hope for a life where she didn't have to be alone, where she could just be herself. But would she take the risk? Would she allow herself to trust again? The answer wasn't clear yet. But one thing was certain. She was no longer the same person she had been when Kai first walked into her life, and she wasn't sure where this journey would lead, but she knew she couldn't turn back. The moment of vulnerability had come, and with it, the possibility of change, breaking the chains of pride. The Empress paced back and forth in her private chambers, her mind racing. Everything had changed. Since Kai had walked into her life, nothing had felt the same. The walls she had spent years building, the layers of armor she had carefully crafted to protect herself from the world, were now cracking. She felt exposed like a raw nerve, vulnerable and unsure of how to proceed. Kai's words still echoed in her mind, his quiet confidence, his honesty, something she had never expected from anyone, let alone a simple human. For years she had, hidden behind her pride, her title, and the unshakable belief that power was the only thing that mattered. But now, she was beginning to question everything. Was power really the answer? Had she been so blinded by her own pride that she had neglected the one thing she needed the most? Connection? A knock on the door broke her thoughts. "Enter," she commanded, her voice still betraying the uncertainty she felt. Kai stepped inside, his presence calm and steady. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing slightly. "I came to speak with you. I think it's time we had a real conversation. No more walls, no more masks." The Empress looked at him, her eyes narrowing. She had been avoiding him for days, unsure of what to say or how to handle the feelings he had stirred within her. Part of her wanted to push him away, to send him back to where he came from and keep her distance. But another part of her, a part she had buried for so long, wanted to hear what he had to say. "I don't need another lesson in humility, Kai," she said, her voice cool. "I know what I am. I know what I've done. I don't need you to remind me. I'm not here to teach you anything," Kai replied, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm here to help you understand that you don't have to carry everything alone. You don't have to be the perfect ruler, the perfect Empress. You can be human. You can be real." The Empress's heart skipped a beat. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever dared to question her strength, to suggest that perhaps she didn't have to be perfect all the time. For a moment she wanted to argue with him, to deny what he was saying, but something stopped her. Deep down she knew he was right. The weight of her pride had been suffocating her for so long. "What do you want from me, Kai?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you doing this? Why are you trying so hard to break through my walls?" Kai stepped closer, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet intensity. "Because I believe you're worth it," he said simply. "Because I believe you've been living in a cage of your own making. A cage of pride, of fear, and I think it's time you let yourself out." The Empress's breath caught in her throat. Kai's words hit her like a blow to the chest. She had always prided herself on her strength, on her ability to control everything around her. But now, for the first time, she was beginning to see how that very control had kept her trapped. She had built walls around herself to protect her heart, to shield herself from the pain of losing those she loved. But in doing so, she had also kept herself from feeling anything at all. She had buried her emotions so deeply that she had forgotten what it meant to truly live. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice shaking. "If I let go of my pride, if I let myself be vulnerable, I'll lose everything. My empire, my power, my control. Everything I've worked for will be gone." "No," Kai said softly. "You won't lose anything. You'll gain everything. You'll gain the freedom to be who you truly are, not just what the Empire wants you to be. You'll gain the ability to connect with others, to find peace in your own heart. And most of all, you'll gain the chance to be loved, not for your title, not for your power, but for who you are." The Empress stared at him, her mind racing. Love? What did he mean by that? Love had always seemed like a weakness, a luxury she couldn't afford. She had spent so many years building her empire, maintaining control, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be loved and to love in return. Her heart had become cold, a fortress of pride and duty. She had told herself that she didn't need anyone, that she was above such emotions. But now, with Kai standing before her, speaking words, that struck a chord deep within her. She wasn't so sure anymore. "And what if I can't do it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "What if I can't let go of the pride, the power? What if I can't change?" Kai smiled, his gaze unwavering. "Then you'll take it one step at a time. No one expects you to change overnight. But the first step is admitting that you don't have to do everything alone. You don't have to carry the weight of the galaxy on your shoulders." The Empress felt a tear slip down her cheek, and for a moment she didn't try to hide it. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something real. The weight of her pride, the burden of being the perfect ruler, had kept her isolated, but now she was beginning to see that she didn't have to be perfect. She didn't have to be alone. "I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can let go of everything." "You don't have to do it all at once," Kai replied softly. "Just take the first step. Trust me, and trust yourself. You're stronger than you think. And you don't have to be afraid of who you are." The Empress stood still for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. Kai's words had pierced through the layers of pride she had surrounded herself with for so long. For the first time, she felt like she could breathe again, like there was hope for something more than the empire, more than the title of Empress. "I don't know where this will lead," she whispered, her eyes meeting Kai's. "But I'll try." Kai nodded, his smile gentle. "That's all I'm asking." And in that moment, something inside the Empress shifted. The chains of pride that had bound her for so long began to loosen. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something other than the weight of her responsibilities. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she felt like she might finally be free. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, doubts, and obstacles. But the Empress knew one thing for certain. She was no longer alone. And that was the first step toward something more powerful than power itself, true freedom. The test of loyalty. The Empress stood before the Grand Council, her expression unreadable. The room was silent, every advisor and general waiting for her to speak. The weight of their gaze felt like 100 invisible hands pressing down on her shoulders, but this time, it wasn't the pressure of their expectations that made her uneasy. It was something else. Something far more dangerous. Kai's words, the vulnerability he had unlocked within her, still echoed in her mind. His gentle challenge to her pride had begun to take root, and now, she was about to face a choice that could shake the foundations of her empire. For the first time in years, she found herself questioning the very core of her rule. How much longer could she continue to build her empire on fear, control, and strength alone? How much longer could she keep up the facade that she was untouchable, that no one could break through her walls? Kai had cracked those walls wide open with nothing more than his honesty, and now she had to decide if she would embrace the change or crush it beneath the weight of her power. "Your Majesty," one of her generals, a seasoned warrior named Talon, spoke, breaking her thoughts. "We have a decision to make. The rebellion on the Outer Rim has escalated. We need your command. Should we deploy the full force of the fleet and crush them once and for all?" The Empress felt the familiar surge of cold determination rise in her chest. Her first instinct was to give the order, to squash the rebellion with the might of her military. After all, that was what she had always done. Force, control, strength. That was how she maintained order. But as she looked at the faces of her generals, all waiting for her response, she felt a pang of uncertainty. It wasn't fear. It was doubt. Doubt about the cost of this victory. Doubt about the toll it would take on the lives of innocent people who had been swept up in the chaos of war. "I'm not sure," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words sounded strange coming from her mouth, but they felt right. "This isn't just about military power anymore. We need to consider the lives of those involved. The people who are fighting aren't just rebels. They're humans, too." The room fell into a stunned silence. Her generals exchanged confused glances, but the Empress felt a strange sense of clarity, like the fog that had clouded her mind for so long was finally beginning to lift. "What do you suggest, then?" Talon asked, his voice skeptical. "Should we simply negotiate with them? Show weakness?" Not weakness, the Empress replied, her voice steady. But there's more to power than just destroying your enemies. We need to understand why they're rebelling. We need to know what drives them before we act. If we crush them without understanding, we'll never stop the cycle of violence. The generals shifted uncomfortably, some of them exchanging uneasy glances. For the first time, they were witnessing a side of their Empress they hadn't seen before. A side that was hesitant, thoughtful, even compassionate. But they had been raised on the belief that strength was the only way to rule. Compassion was a luxury they couldn't afford. Your Majesty, another advisor spoke up, his voice thick with concern. With all due respect, this hesitation could cost us everything. The rebellion is growing stronger every day. If we don't act decisively, we risk losing control of the entire region. The people will see our weakness. And what do you propose we do then? The Empress asked, her voice low but firm. Do we burn entire cities to the ground to prove our strength? Do we sacrifice innocent lives just to send a message? The advisor fell silent, unable to answer. The Empress's question hung in the air, challenging the very foundation of everything they had been taught about leadership. For the first time, she could see the cracks in the empire she had built. She had always believed that power was the key to maintaining control, but now she realized that it was the human cost, the lives lost, the suffering endured, that was the true price of her reign. She turned to Kai, who had been standing in the corner of the room, silent as always. His calm demeanor, his quiet strength, had been a constant presence ever since he had first entered her life. He hadn't once tried to influence her decisions, but she knew that his words had planted a seed in her heart. It was time to water it, to let it grow. Kai, she said, her voice steady but carrying the weight of a question that had been building for days. What would you do in my place? Kai looked at her, his gaze thoughtful. He had never been one to give advice or to offer solutions, but the Empress knew that he understood something she had been struggling to comprehend. His answer, when it came, was simple yet profound. I would listen, he said. I would listen to the people, to the rebels, and understand their pain. Because the people you're fighting aren't just enemies. They're your subjects, your equals. They're the ones who keep your empire running. And if you ignore their voices, if you crush them without understanding, you risk losing everything you've worked for. The Empress's heart tightened. She had spent so many years ignoring the voices of the people, thinking that they were insignificant compared to the power of her empire. But now, as she looked at Kai, she realized how wrong she had been. Power without compassion was empty, control without understanding was fragile. And if she wanted to rule truly, she had to see the people beneath her, hear their pain, understand their fears, and lead them, not with strength alone, but with wisdom and empathy. But what if they refuse to listen? The Empress asked, her voice filled with doubt. What if they don't want peace? Then you fight, Kai replied quietly. But you fight with honor, with the knowledge that you're doing everything you can to understand them, to help them, not just destroy them. There's power in that, Empress, more power than you can imagine. The Empress took a deep breath, her thoughts swirling. She was facing the greatest test of her rule. This decision would define her legacy, for better or for worse. If she chose to listen, to try a different path, it would risk everything she had worked for. But if she chose to crush the rebellion without thought, she would be no better than the tyrant she had once despised. Her hand trembled slightly as she raised it to the council. We will listen, she said, her voice firm. We will send emissaries to the rebels. We will hear their grievances and seek a peaceful solution. If they refuse, if they insist on violence, then we will act. But we will not start this war. We will not be the ones to blind ourselves to the humanity of those who oppose us. The council was silent, stunned by her words. Some of her advisors looked as though they had seen a ghost, while others seemed unsure of what to make of her decision. But Kai's presence, standing at her side, gave her strength. The Empress had made her choice. It was the hardest decision she had ever made, but it was the first decision she had made with her heart, not her pride. The empire she had spent so long building on control and fear was about to be tested in ways she couldn't predict. As the council slowly dispersed, the Empress stood, alone in the room, her gaze lingering on Kai. "Thank you," she said softly, "for making me see that strength doesn't just come from control. It comes from knowing when to listen." Kai nodded, his expression unreadable. "You're welcome, Empress. But remember, this is only the beginning." And with that, the test had begun. Omini, a choice between power and love, the Empress stood in the grand hall of her palace, the weight of her crown pressing down on her head. The chandeliers above her flickered softly, casting long shadows across the marble floors. The walls were lined with tapestries depicting battles won, enemies conquered, and empires built. It was a place of power, of wealth, and of glory. But for the first time, the Empress felt none of that. It was as though she stood on the precipice of a decision that could change everything, and the ground beneath her feet was unstable. Her mind raced with questions, each one more daunting than the last. The rebellion had been quieted, but at what cost? She had made the choice to listen, to seek peace, and while many had lauded her for her wisdom, there were others, powerful allies and generals, who whispered behind her back, questioning her decisions. They were used to her strength, her decisiveness. They had been trained to follow a leader who ruled with an iron fist, not one who sought understanding. She had broken the old ways, and now, as the pieces of her empire shifted, she was unsure if it was the right choice. Kai had been with her every step of the way, offering counsel, his unwavering belief in her a constant. But even he could not make this decision for her. She had come to realize that the hardest choice of all was not about the empire. It was about her heart, about whether she would continue to embrace the cold, calculated power that had once defined her, or whether she would open herself up to something she had long avoided. Love. She had never believed in love. It was a luxury she could not afford. Her role as Empress had always come first, and everything else, every relationship, every emotion, had been secondary. Love, to her, had always been a weakness. It was something that clouded judgment, something that made people soft and vulnerable. But Kai had shown her that love didn't have to be a weakness. It could be a strength, a force that drove people to do unimaginable things for the ones they cared about. He had broken through her walls, and now, for the first time in her life, she had to decide if she could truly allow herself to feel that way. The doors to the hall creaked open, and Kai stepped inside, his presence as calm and steady as ever. His eyes, dark and deep, locked onto hers immediately, and she felt a wave of something she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge before. Desire, longing, fear? She couldn't say, but there was something in his gaze that made her heart race, and it terrified her. "Empress," Kai said softly, his voice almost a whisper, as if he too understood the weight of the moment. "There's something we need to discuss." The Empress turned, her face a mask of resolve. She had to make this decision, and she had to make it now. She could feel the weight of the moment settling around her like a storm, building with each passing second. "I know," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I've been thinking. About everything. About the empire. About my choices. About us." Kai stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You've been carrying the weight of this empire for so long. It's natural to be conflicted, but I need to know what you truly want. Not as the Empress, but as the woman you are beneath the crown." The words hit her like a wave. Beneath the crown. Beneath the role she had played for so many years. She had always prided herself on being the Empress, the ruler who commanded respect, who made decisions that shaped the galaxy. But beneath that role, who was she? Who was she without the title, without the empire? She had never allowed herself to find out, never allowed herself to think beyond the throne. But now, with Kai standing before her, she realized that she couldn't keep running from that question. She couldn't keep pretending that she had all the answers. The empire had been her life, her purpose, but it was also the thing that had kept her from living, from feeling. I don't know if I can give up everything, she admitted, her voice faltering for the first time in their conversation. I don't know if I can give up this power, this responsibility. What would happen to the people if I let go? What would happen to the empire? The empire doesn't need a ruler who's afraid to live, Kai replied, his voice gentle but firm. The empire needs a leader who understands the people she governs, someone who can see them as equals, not just subjects, someone who can lead with love and strength, not just fear and control. The Empress felt a lump form in her throat. His words pierced deeper than she had expected. Was it possible? Could she truly lead with love? Could she allow herself to feel that way, knowing the risks it carried? I have never allowed myself to love anyone, she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. I've always kept everyone at a distance. I've never let anyone in. Because if I did, I would lose everything. My control, my power. Everything I've built would crumble. You don't have to lose everything, Kai said softly. Love doesn't mean weakness. It doesn't mean losing control. It means opening yourself up to something more than what you've known. It means allowing yourself to be human, to be imperfect. And when you do that, you become even stronger than you were before. The Empress stood still, her mind racing. She had always feared that love would make her vulnerable, that it would take away everything she had worked for. But what if, instead of weakening her, it could make her stronger? What if love could be the key to leading with true power? Kai stepped closer, his hand reaching out, offering her something she had never allowed herself to take. I can't promise you that everything will be easy. I can't promise you that the empire will be free of struggles or that you won't face opposition. But I can promise you this. If you let me, I will stand by you. Not as your advisor, not as your subject, but as someone who believes in you, someone who believes in what you can become. The Empress's breath caught in her chest. His words, simple and sincere, hit her with an intensity she had never known. Could she do it? Could she open herself up to the possibility of love, knowing that it would change everything? For a moment, everything else faded away. The empire, the generals, the council, it all became distant, insignificant in the face of what she was feeling. Her gaze locked with Kai's, and in that moment she knew what her heart had been telling her all along. She could choose love. She could choose something more than the empire, more than power. She could choose to be human. I'm scared, she whispered, her voice trembling. I know, Kai replied, his voice full of tenderness. But sometimes the scariest things are the ones that lead us to our greatest strength. The Empress closed her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. She was standing on the edge of a decision that could change everything. Power, control, love, all of it was on the line. But she knew, deep down, that the only way forward was to choose love, to allow herself to be vulnerable, to trust, and to lead with her heart as much as her mind. When she opened her eyes again, she met Kai's gaze, her decision clear. I choose love, she said, her voice steady, resolute. And I choose you. Kai smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. Then let's build something together, something stronger than either of us could have done alone. And with that, the Empress made her choice. The hardest choice of her life, but the right one. The Empress and the human heart, the empire had changed. The once imposing walls of the grand palace, lined with banners of conquest and power, now seemed to stand as silent witnesses to a new era. The halls, once echoing with the march of soldiers and the hum of political intrigue, were now filled with quiet conversations and moments of reflection. Change was in the air, and it was palpable. The Empress had made her choice, not just to rule, but to feel, to love, to let go of the iron grip she had held on her heart for so long, and now, everything she had known was being tested. She stood before the great balcony of her palace, her gaze sweeping over the city below. The streets, once teeming with fear and obedience, now seemed alive with possibility. The people, once resigned to their fate under her cold rule, were beginning to hope. They were beginning to believe in the vision she had shared with them, but it wasn't just about the empire anymore. It was about something deeper, something that tied her to Kai, the man who had made her see what it meant to be human. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the city, the Empress felt a familiar presence beside her. Kai had been by her side through it all, guiding her, challenging her, and finally breaking down the wall she had so carefully constructed. Together, they had begun to rebuild, not just an empire, but a life. One where love wasn't a weakness, but a strength. "You've come a long way," Kai said quietly, his voice warm but carrying a hint of sadness. "But there's still a long road ahead." The Empress nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of their journey. "I know. I've seen the change in the people, Kai, but what if it's too late? What if they're too afraid to trust me?" "Trust doesn't come overnight," Kai replied, stepping closer. "But you've already shown them that you're not the ruler they once feared. You've already shown them that you can lead with both heart and mind. That's what will make them follow you, even when things are uncertain." The Empress turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "And what about us? What about you and me?" Kai's gaze softened, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his lips. "What about us?" he asked, his voice teasing but also full of sincerity. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The Empress felt a weight lift from her chest. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly feel the depth of their connection. She had spent so many years building walls, hiding behind power, that she had never allowed herself to experience the simplicity of love. But now, standing here with Kai, she realized that love didn't have to be complicated or tied to titles. It could be raw, it could be real, and it could change everything. "You've made me see things differently," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For so long I thought that my power was everything. I thought that ruling with an iron fist was the only way to lead, but you showed me that true strength comes from understanding, from compassion, and from letting go of the need to control everything." Kai reached out, his hand resting gently on hers. "You've always had that strength, Empress. You just had to find it within yourself. And now you're not just a ruler, you're a leader in the truest sense, one who understands the heart of her people." But even as he spoke, a sense of unease began to settle over the Empress. She had made her choice, but that didn't mean the challenges had ended. There were still those who would resist, still those who believed that power could only be maintained through fear and strength. And what would happen when they rose up against her? Would they truly follow her if they knew that she had allowed herself to love? If they saw that she was no longer the distant, untouchable Empress they had once feared? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. A messenger entered the room, his face grave. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing low. "News from the Outer Rim. There has been an attack on one of our colonies. A rebellion has reignited. They are rallying under the banner of a new leader, one who claims to be the true heir to the throne." The words hit the Empress like a physical blow. The weight of the crown felt suddenly unbearable. Not again. She had been warned that the seeds of rebellion were still there, festering beneath the surface. But she had hoped, prayed, that the peace she had fought for would hold. Now it seemed like her empire was teetering on the brink of collapse once more. "Who is this new leader?" she asked, her voice tight with a mix of anger and fear. "The messenger didn't say," the soldier replied, his voice trembling. "But they claim to have the support of the people, Your Majesty. They say the time for change has come, and that the empire needs a ruler who will lead with strength, not compassion." The Empress clenched her fists, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. The moment she had feared. The test of everything she had worked for. Everything she had come to believe in. Would she return to the cold, calculating ruler she had once been, the one who crushed rebellions with force? Or would she stay true to the new path she had chosen, the one that embraced love, compassion, and understanding? Kai stepped forward, his voice calm and steady. "You don't have to face this alone. We've come this far together. Whatever happens, I'm with you." The Empress met his gaze, her mind racing. She had made so many choices, some right, some wrong. But now, she had to make the most important decision of all. Who would she be? Would she return to the empire of fear and oppression? Or would she fight for the vision she had begun to build? With Kai, the vision of a future where power wasn't something to be feared but something to be shared, she turned back to the messenger, her expression hardening. "Prepare the fleet," she said, her voice carrying the authority of the Empress she had once been. "We're going to meet this new rebellion head-on, but we will do it on our terms. We will offer them peace, but we will not cower. This empire is mine, and I will fight for it." Kai looked at her, his expression unreadable, but there was no fear in his eyes. Only trust. Trust in her. Trust in what they had built together. "And what if they refuse peace?" Kai asked softly. "Then we will fight," she said, her voice steady now, filled with the conviction that had once defined her. "But not with hatred, not with fear. We will fight with everything we have, and we will show them that this empire, this new world, is stronger than any rebellion, because it is built on something they can never take away: love." As the Empress stood there, her heart beating with a mixture of fear and resolve, she realized that this was her true test. It was no longer about power or control. It was about choice. The choice to lead with compassion. The choice to fight for what she believed in. And the choice to love, even in the face of war. The future of her empire, of her people, would depend on this choice. And no matter what happened, she knew that she was ready. Because in the end, she had found something more powerful than power itself: the human heart.